I'm happy to be there for your enjoyment. But all right, good afternoon again. As you know, the water conference gets underway next week. So in preview to that, we're delighted to be joined by Lotta Tahtinen, the chief of the Outreach and Partnerships branch in DESA. And sitting with her are Henk Ovink, the special envoy of the Kingdom of the Netherlands for water, and Sulton Rahimzoda, the special envoy of the president of Tajikistan for water. So Lotta, I understand you're going to make some opening remarks, and then we'll go down the line.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Stefan. Good morning, good afternoon, distinguished members of the press. It's my great pleasure to join you at this press briefing to talk about the UN 2023 Water Conference, together with the two co-hosts, governments of the Republic of Tajikistan and the Kingdom of the Netherlands. So, dear colleagues, as you all know, next week, from 22 to 24 March, we'll have thousands of representatives of governments, UN system, and diverse stakeholders, including civil society, business leaders, young people and activists, prominent mayors, scientists, and many others, who will all unite here at the UN headquarters in New York at what will be the first UN water conference in a generation. As of now, we have indication of 12 heads of state and government and about 80 ministers and other high-level representatives of governments attending. We also have about 6,500 participants from NGOs and other stakeholders representing civil society, young people, women, private sector, and others from around the world that have all registered to attend, as well as several heads of UN entities. The three-day conference will feature an opening and closing ceremony, 6 official plenary meetings, and 5 interactive dialogues that cover cross-cutting topics, including water and health, water and sustainable development, water and climate change, resilience and environment, water cooperation, and finally, Water Action Decade. There will also be 4 high-level special events that highlight the importance of cross-sectoral collaboration in support of water, with great stakeholder participation. We also have around 550 side events taking place, with over 200 held inside the UN headquarters and others taking place either in person in different locations in New York City or virtually. The level of engagement and the diversity of the topics that are covered is really a reflection of the great mobilizing power that both this conference and water issues as a whole have. A key outcome of the conference will be an ambitious water action agenda, which will capture new water-related commitments from UN member states, the UN system, and other stakeholders through an online registry that has been set up by my department, UN DESA. This online registry is accessible through the conference website, and I invite you all to take a look at that. As of this morning, we have 360 commitments that have already been registered by governments, UN, and stakeholders through this platform. As our Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, recently said, this conference must result in a bold water action agenda that gives our world's lifeblood the commitment it deserves. Many of these commitments are ambitious, both in scope and funding, with several commitments mobilizing millions and in a few cases billions of dollars for water action. We expect many more commitments to be announced throughout the 3 days of the conference, both in the official meetings and also across all the side events. I'm pleased to inform you that the preparations for the conference are now in their final stages. We have the programs for the 5 interactive dialogues, as well as the programs for the special events and side events available on the conference website. We also have in-depth concept papers for the interactive dialogues ready. There is a detailed information note to all participants, which provides useful information, including to representatives of the media on how to participate and take part. Together with the Department of Global Communications, we have prepared a background note on the conference for the media, as well as explainers of the interactive dialogue, themes, and other water issues, and a press kit that are all available on the conference website. There's also several social media assets available for your use. I also invite you all to consult the conference website for the latest information. Colleagues, the UN 2023 Water Conference will unite the world for water. And beyond 24 March, the conference will be an important contribution to the SDG Summit in September, which, as you know, marks the midpoint review of all the SDGs. Water action can increase food security and equality between genders. Water action keeps children in school, communities at peace, and nature healthy. The time to act is now. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We'll now turn, I think, to Henk Ovink of the Kingdom of the Netherlands. Henk, please.
Thanks, Stefan, and thank you, Lotta, and also thank you, UN DESA and UN Water, for the strong and amazing and inspiring partnership in prepping us for next week's conference. Less than 7 days away, and that means 163 hours from now, before the opening. This conference, starting next week, is proudly co-hosted by the Kingdom of the Netherlands and the Republic of Tajikistan. It doesn't come a moment too soon, because water, whether it's too much, too little, or too polluted, is the factor linking the great challenges of our time. From food and energy to migration and urbanization, water is the common threat, and it now threatens virtually all the SDGs. Science and evidence around the world tell us now that we have altered the global water cycle that connects nations in more profound ways than we previously understood. We know we are connected to transboundary water flows in rivers, lakes, and aquifers, groundwater, but now also through atmospheric flows. And that means that we can no longer address water as a local or regional challenge. We have to address it as a global challenge. We have, in fact, breached the planetary boundaries for water, the threshold beyond which our human impact will put society at risk. We have to radically change the way we think about how we use, manage, and value water. That is the core line of next week's conference. And we rapidly have to figure out how to repair and replenish the water cycle, even as we prosper. And the good news is that we do have what it takes to put water back on a sustainable track. We have the scientific knowledge, we have most of the technologies and capacities, we have the financing. The question therefore is, do we have the political and societal will to address the water crisis head-on and reinvent our governance and finance, our policies and politics, our practices and approaches? Do we have this will, politically and societally, to change the way we understand, value and manage water radically and act upon that for a safer, healthier and more prosperous world, leaving no one behind? That is what this conference is all about. The UN 2023 Water Conference calls for water to be prioritized in decision-making, both in policy and politics, public and private. It is only the beginning of a global change in how we understand, value and manage water, and a unique opportunity to bring water at the heart of policy making, at the heart of our economic thinking, and accelerate collective action, finance and ambition on water across multiple sectors to get the world on track for a water-secure world for all and help catalyze achieving the SDGs. We've worked very hard, the Netherlands and Tajikistan, with the support of UN DESA and UN Water and our partners to make this conference in the lead-up, as well as the conference itself in the aftermath, inclusive, cross-sectoral and action-oriented. There's a record number, as already mentioned by Lotta, of newly accredited organizations, and including an unprecedented participation from underrepresented stakeholder groups like youth, indigenous peoples, and other grassroots groups from all over the world next week. I would like to give a shout out to these groups on how they have organized in prepping for this conference and to unify their voices to land next week here in New York. Cross-sectoral means that the conference aims to take water out of its usual water bubble, its water box, by looking at how water is cross-cutting through the whole 2030 agenda and help achieve these nexuses on energy, food, health, biodiversity, climate, and beyond. And last but not least, action orientation. Together with Tajikistan, we've tried everything in our power to make sure this conference is just not another conference, but delivers with concrete action on the ground. We don't need a conference with bold statements, we need a conference with bold commitments. And the boldness to put these commitments into action. The structure of all these voluntary commitments, we launched the Water Action Agenda, so we can see each other's commitments, learn from one another, be inspired, but also ensure transparency and accountability, and join in the financing and help of replication and scaling up where possible and needed. And there is a lot to look forward to. One example is the preliminary report of the Global Commission on the Economics of Water, a global panel of renowned experts initiated by the government of the Netherlands that will focus on the critical importance of water for our economy, society, and environment. Their findings will help us to make better choices for a sustainable future. There's also an open call of business leaders to make 100 high-stressed basins net water positive in terms of water quantity, quality, and access to water, sanitation, and hygiene. And we're expecting several countries to make commitments at the highest political level to drive for universal access to water, sanitation, and hygiene services for all. Apart from these commitments, there's a lot going on in the city of New York as part of New York Water Week, such as the Australian ultra-runner, Mina Gully, who will complete next week her 200th marathon in a single year. Yes, 200 marathons in a single year, ahead of the UN Water Conference on March 22nd in New York. She runs around the world, she ran around the world in the last year, 200, she landed in the US, met with everyone from across the world to raise awareness on this one single issue, water, and how it connects everything in life, but also send a message out that to achieve change, we have to do hard things, like she's doing, but also saying that change is possible, if only we do it. All in all, the conference offers a once-in-a-generation opportunity to bring the world together and bring about this real change in how we understand, value, and manage water, how we forge partnerships and build a sustainable, more inclusive economic future. No one, business, investor, government, or community, can value or manage water in isolation. This is the complexity, but also the opportunity of water. Change needs us all as individuals to care. Change needs us all to act. The UN 2023 Water Conference can and must be a turning point for the change the world needs. And the conference is not the end, but only the beginning. We will see water, and Lotta said it already, at the high-level political forum and the SDG summit. We saw water in Sharm el-Sheikh at COP27, and we will see it represented, of course, in COP28. We want to see it in the stocktake of the Food Systems Summit, where it was left out. But with the agreement on the oceans and CBD and Montreal Convene, water started to raise to the level of attention it actually deserves. Water can never be left out of any of these UN conversations, agreements, and conferences after this conference. We want to see this ripple effect across the world. I'd like to give the floor now to my esteemed colleague and dear friend, brother Sulton from Tajikistan, who will speak on our journey over the past 2 years and the conference follow-up.
Thank you, Henk. Thank you, Stefano. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. I would like also to echo Henk's message in terms of the great partnership of Tajikistan and the Netherlands in this journey, but I would like also highlight the great partnership with the UN system, and especially DESA and the UN Water in this very complicated from one side, but from other side, very inspirational journey towards the 2023 conference next week here in New York. And I would like also taking this opportunity to thank Henk and Lotta for setting the stage and highlighting the key elements and principles of the process that was put in place in preparation for this historic event here in New York. Let me now continue with highlighting some more critical factors that were driving all our efforts in preparation of the conference. The first, this conference is a conference of hope. Hope for 2.1 billion people who still do not have access to safely managed drinking water. Hope for 3.6 billion people who lack access to safely managed sanitation. Hope for 500 million people still practicing open defecation, and hope for 2.3 billion people live in water-stressed countries, of which 733 million live in high and critically water-stressed countries. Second, this conference is not only about water, but it is about social well-being, about economic growth, and many other global public goods, such as climate, energy, food, biodiversity, and human capital. Water is an enabler and main contributing factor to every SDG. And the third, the conference is about action. As Henk mentioned, Lotta mentioned, the world community needs to transition from the justification to the implementation stage and focus on commitments that will not remain pledges, but will trigger real collective actions and create a transformative change. Yes, the action is key factor because we are far behind to achieve SDG 6 and other water-related goals, and urgent actions are needed to get the world back on track. As Lotta mentioned, the Water Action Agenda, the major outcome of this conference, has already registered 360 commitments. And we have been observing the increasing number day by day. Only yesterday, Lotta mentioned the 80 commitments had been submitted to the platform of the Water Action Agenda. The breadth and scope of these commitments, as sanctioned by many, is truly inspiring. They range from those targeting introduction of new technologies and open data for improving water resources management and planning, to those improving education for water sector professionals, enabling innovative financing for water resilience, and rethinking incentives for water use efficiency. I'm happy to see that these commitments align with the principles of inclusivity, cross-sectorality, and action orientation that we put at the core of the preparatory process, as already mentioned by Henk. But we should ask ourselves, is it enough? Will we walk out of the conference satisfied with the outcome that was created, and will it translate into political, technological, financial solution sufficient to meet the scale and complexity of the needs? I'm impressed with the active involvement of civil society organizations, which already account for more than 30% of all commitments in the Water Action Agenda. But there is a strong need for the government entities, UN agencies, and multilateral development partners and private sector to level up their game in prioritizing and addressing the water challenge through increased number of stronger commitments. I would like to emphasize that no commitment is small. Every commitment is of significant importance, as it may bring a long-awaited change for even one household, one school, one village, one city. As we say, drop by drop, it becomes an ocean. At the same time, we need bold, transformative, and innovative commitments, which could help us to create a change and around which we can build partnership, alliances, and coalitions. I was delighted to see a number of such great commitments registered in the Water Action Agenda. We are literally in the final countdown of the conference, and indeed we wish to see the increasing number of commitments registered in the Water Action Agenda in the coming days and during the conference. But the most important question is what comes next? the water action agenda will continue requiring a leadership in terms of implementation, monitoring, and reporting. Therefore, my personal view and our understanding is that while the follow-up of these commitments should be embedded into existing structures such as the Sendai Framework Review, HLPF SDG Summit, the Summit of the Future, Dushanbe Water Process, and others, there is a need for follow-up mechanisms throughout the decade and even 2030, for the period of 2030. And last but not least, let me conclude by 3 important messages that I have alluded to in the beginning of my remark. Message of hope, interdependency, and action. Turning hope of those vulnerable billions of people into reality. Understanding of interdependency of this important, vital resource, and implementing our actions, implementing our commitments. The opportunity is here. This historical conference is our best opportunity, which we have no right to miss. And for that, we need the world united for water. Thank you very much for your attention. I will be happy to answer your questions.
Thank you, Sultan. First question goes to Sherwin Bryce Peace.
Sherwin Bryce Peace, South African Broadcasting, and on behalf of the UN Correspondents Association, thank you so much for coming to talk to us. You talked, sir, about the need to educate workers in water sector professionals. That relates to a broader question. Countries are struggling with water management and resources because they do not have the level of professionals that they require. They don't have water engineers, scientists, hydrologists, geohydrologists, and resource economists. How in the short term, given that the SDGs are in the deadline is 2030, are we going to upskill the required level of workers, right? The skills required in these countries, particularly in the developing world, if we're going to meet the targets that are critical to Goal 6. How do we ensure that the money coming in through this conference gets to the ground where it's needed most? Because the problem in a lot of developing countries is they do not have the requisite skills to manage the water resources they have. This is why you have countries dealing with pollution. The fact that water wastage is a huge concern. So how do we, catalyze this money so that it has impact in the short term?
Thank you. Please.
Thank you very much for your good question. First, this conference is about the midterm review of the Water Action Decade, Water for Sustainable Development. If you look inside of this decade, one of the objectives is capacity building. And the rising the capacity and having the educated people and the knowledge also sits at the plan of SG on Water Action Decade. The second moment is the themes of the conference. We have 5 interactive dialogues, which was mentioned already, but we didn't say about the cross-cutting issues. The 5 pillars of the Global Acceleration Framework, which includes basically financing, data, and it includes also capacity building. So all the discussions through these interactive dialogues, but also within the special events and the side events, they will focus also in this kind of issues. I mean, the capacity building, where education and knowledge is there, also part of this capacity building. And we hope much, and the Water Action Agenda, basically, our call for the world community was, to look in the conference and submit their commitments, looking in the themes of this conference. We hope much that many such kind of commitments will come up through the discussion, are already registered, I guess, even in the Water Action Agenda. So they will help us to build this kind of capacity. Thank you.
James Bays, Al Jazeera.
If you may, I will ask you to help us cover this conference, because you say it's not just another conference and it's going to be action, not words. Can you help us with, because it is quite hard to sell this sort of thing and get cut through from our editors about why we should be covering it. What actions at the end of this conference are going to be announced that we can sum up in a headline? And my experience when you have these big diplomatic gatherings, if you are actually getting things done, there are contentious issues that you are negotiating until the last minute. What are those issues that you are hoping to get agreement on, but you might not?
Thank you, and thanks for your question. In contrast to many other conferences where there is an agreement we negotiate against. We're now in CSW, and there's negotiations going on. On water, there's no agreement, so there's also not a negotiation. So that will limit a bit the wordsmithing. Second, coming from the modalities resolution in 2020, the clear outline for this conference was voluntary commitments. And from the beginning, the Netherlands and Tajikistan said, if we only get voluntary commitments, that might lead to an amazing set of commitments that will not have a secured follow-up. And before that, you have a lot of action, but that might not fall in place. So we agreed on this water action agenda, an agenda that will structure all the commitments along the themes of the conference and will be able to validate and evaluate, but also help replicate and scale those commitments up. That got a life of its own. As Lotta explained, the water action agenda is online. It already shows those commitments, and the conference is also, in that sense, the place where we forge new coalitions along those commitments. If you go through the commitments, and I don't know which headlines always like to hit first, but the interesting part, two parts I want to highlight is one, yes, there are small and larger ones. So if you add it all up, we'll see there's one commitment of close to $450 billion being invested in water security projects. So we can add them all up, and before you know it, there's headlines of trillions of investments coming for water security out of this conference. But I would like to focus on the coalitions behind that. The fact that we have across sectors and silos commitments that really will make a difference that is systemic in the context of food security, energy security, biodiversity, and climate, that really will help overcome the lock-in in these challenges we too often face. And to that point, this conference in the preparatory process already showed that water is less contested than some of the other issues. The reason why, it's connected to everything, so everyone has a stake. And if you organize this well, it means that you can bring stakeholders with different interests together. And this is exactly what is happening and has been happening in prepping for this conference, that these coalitions and commitments are not siloed, but are actually cross-sectoral, and showcase that it is possible to deliver on the SDGs. And that to the point of Sulton, that the conference not only offers hope in an abstract sense, but in a really concrete sense. So if you sum it up at the end of next week's conference, you will say, hey, achieving the SDGs is possible if water is taken into account, but also seen as a driving factor for delivery. And the proof of that is within those commitments. So that ambition is not only words, because you need the words to put the commitments into something that we understand, but it is also the dollars, the political will, and the societal will behind that.
If I may, you say that there's no agreement document, there's no outcome document. If you have this agreement, you said there's quite a lot of common ground here. Why? Whose decision was it not to have a final outcome document of this?
The outcome of the conference is the report of the deliberations and the set of commitments. And this was negotiated in 2020 in the modalities resolution. So we agreed as a world that that would be the outcome.
Thank you. Yvonne?
Thank you. Yvonne Murray, RTE, Ireland's national media. This might be a tricky question to answer, but which global territorial disputes have water security at the heart of them?
You want the full list?
Your top picks.
I can't answer that question. There is a website that tracks water-related risks that you could look into. I don't even have the name, but you can easily Google it. Research shows that water, while being the root cause in the context of climate and can be a root cause of conflict and migration, is not the driver of that. It always depends on what the political, societal, economic and environmental situation is. But water insecurity can really undermine stability. So,
can you point to one place in the world where that is the case?
Small and big, perhaps. But this is a very complex question, you understand, especially in this context. We now see, and I explained this, I think it's 2/3 of all rivers around the world are shared. And that's a very visible way of sharing water. And coming from Europe and the Netherlands, our Rhine was a contested space. A place where we dumped everything in, and being the Netherlands at the end of this Rhine, the delta is where we had dead fish showing up. We turned that disaster in an opportunity for transboundary cooperation. The groundwater in our world, which the water is you don't see, is 100% shared. And that is not a cause of conflict, but the cause of disaster. So we abuse and over-deplete our groundwaters, and science tells us that close to half of them are now beyond their tipping points, driving insecurity beyond borders. And then with the current rate of climate change and the way we affect our biodiversity and water resources, our water flows in the sky, our atmospheric rivers, are only increasing and impacting cross-continental the economies and environment. And I don't know how that future will look like when that is only increasing.
Thank you. News Agency of Nigeria. Sorry.
Wouldn't an example be Ethiopia, Sudan, Egypt?
If you use your microphone, Sherwin, please.
Just to assist with an example, right? I mean, that's the question. Wouldn't the Egypt, Sudan, Ethiopia dispute around the GERD be an example?
The question was, where is there a conflict?
Territorial dispute.
Well, there are many disputes over water. Actually, you could say there is a dispute over water the moment it crosses a border or a sector everywhere. It's very easy to look at the big dam as one of the drivers of that. We see many transboundary corporations and coalitions that actually take strength. There are more good examples of transboundary water cooperation. Senegal is one of the co-chairs of the Interactive Dialogue, just won a prize last year for their transboundary work. So water, when it crosses a border, really is an opportunity for collaboration, yes. There are examples where that is very challenging, but that challenge doesn't come from the infrastructure put in place. It is because of regional challenges are there. We can even say that the treaty between India and Pakistan, the Indus Treaty, is very much alive. So we can look into the historic and current relationship between countries and look at how water can be a driver for partnership and collaboration. The interesting thing here is that it is not easy. Partnering over interest is never easy. Sharing water where it's becoming scarce is even more problematic. And especially because we now understand in the context of that scarcity that water is underpinning our food security, our energy security, our health security, that sharing that water really demands systemic partnerships. And I think that water agenda drives the understanding that agreeing on how we work together is as important as moving forward and achieving on these goals. So there are many examples where water is part of a tensionous context, and we learn a lot from them in the context and how we work together. And luckily, there are many, many more examples where we show how water, over time, showed that these many interests actually come together. And I know it from the Netherlands, where our water, our governance, our whole governance system is rooted in water governance. 900 years ago, we had the first water authority. Before we were a kingdom, before we had a constitution, we already voted for people that would represent farmers, businesses, communities, politicians in a regional collaborative securing water. Why? Because of its critical importance for our health, our environment, and our safety. We have 4 layers of government in the Netherlands in our constitution. Today, it's funny, is election day in the Netherlands for our provinces and our water authorities. So we go to the ballot to vote for water security. Yes, and that water authority is a collaborative effort. It started from, we call it a polder table. A polder in the Netherlands is a safe place where we keep the water out. And it brings all voices of our society together to ensure water security. Why? Because everybody has a stake, and water can create a level playing field where we can excel on that partnership. That partnerships and those partnerships we see emerge around the world, sometimes backed with agreement, sometimes more informal. We see amazing indigenous partnerships across borders in Asia and Latin America, where the border we created as humans is not determining their partnership, but the water is actually determining their partnership. So yes, water can be that inspiration, but then we have to, next to WASH or anything else, have to commit ourselves to that political will. There is nothing different.
Thank you. News Agency of Nigeria, you've been very patient. Go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you very much. My name is Cecilia, News Agency of Nigeria. My question goes to DESA, that is Lotta. You mentioned that the conference seeks to review the declaration on decade for action on water and sanitation. So what progress have you seen so far from member states on the actions taken, and will you see these efforts translating to achieving the SDG, that's SDG 5 on clean water and basic sanitation? Then if yes, how many countries are on their way to meet the SDG 5? Then to the Tajikistan and Envoy, you talked about the conference, being a conference of hope. That is hope for countries that lack access to basic water. So in what ways will you see, countries from West Africa, especially Nigeria, which has about over 60 million of its population which lack access to clean water. Will you say this conference will be of hope to Nigeria and other countries from West Africa? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that question. And I would like to draw your attention to an annual report that is prepared by my department, DESA, which takes stock of progress on all the SDGs, including SDG 6 on water. The latest report came out last year. We have a new one in the preparation. It will be released later this year towards June, July. It's available online, so I invite you to look at that report. It's prepared together with the statistical system of the UN system, but also with national statistical offices. It gives you a great overview of where do we stand globally on making progress on all the SDGs, including individually. Now, on SDG 6, particularly, which was your question, unfortunately, we are not making progress as fast as we should. And this is a clear message from that SDG Progress Report. If we keep the current rates of implementation in 2030, which is the deadline of the SDGs, we will have still 1.6 million people who will lack safely managed drinking water. We'll have 2.8 billion people who lack safely managed sanitation, and 1.9 billion people who will lack basic hand hygiene facilities, just as an example. And this is with the current state of global progress. But for a more granular look at where do we stand with SDG 6, I invite you to look at that SDG Progress Report, which is available. You can go to the website sdgs.un.org. Thank you.
Thank you, Sultan.
Thank you for your question. Indeed, when I call the conference is hope, it's a hope for billions of people who doesn't have access to safe drinking water and sanitation, and especially in Africa region, of course. But the conference itself will not help us to provide the population, those population with water, sanitation, or hygiene. That's why through the preparation process, we have been encouraging head of states, head of government, the governments, ministers, to come with the commitments to this conference for actions. And actions includes this kind of issue, I mean, the provision of the population with drinking water and with sanitation and other water-related goals and objectives. The second moment is multilateral development banks, international financial institution. We co-host basically sent a separate letter to those institutions to help us with this, calling them also for action, to have in their agenda, in their development agenda, in their portfolios, the water-related projects, to increase the number of, projects related with water. One of the examples, simple example, not simple, but the major example of the commitments is a commitment from the government of Japan, which is committed to allocate 3.8 billion USD in the next 5 years. It's not the commitment inside national within Japan, but also to help the world, the developing countries and less developed countries to achieve their goals in terms of water and sanitation and hygiene. So this is some kind of examples which really we encourage, we incentivize through the preparatory process. And again, we hope, Mark, that in our water action agenda, there will be many these kind of very bold, strong, innovative commitments which help us in this issue. Thank you.
Thank our guests. I'm
Can
sorry.
I
Yes, Henk,
add
please.
to this? Because you're so right. On one hand, we have to emphasize the transversal capacity of water across the 2030 agenda. It is underpinning everything we want to achieve, and because of water insecurity, it's undermining those goals. But water, sanitation and hygiene are of critical importance here, with Lotta explaining the billions of people lacking access to that. That basic human need, a human right. And one of the continents where that gap is largest is Africa. And for that, under the African Union and the leadership of President Macky Sall of Senegal, an African investment program was launched in partnership with many countries in Africa, development banks, private sector, but also the government of the Netherlands. The African investment program was launched a year ago, showed its first presentation at the COP in Sharm el-Sheikh, and will present its roadmap of investment in WASH next week. It would be a little bit weird to now already tell you what's in the report, because the moment will be next week. And I think the session is Wednesday morning, right after the opening. So you can find it on the website, African Investment Program, that will not only tell you what is needed, but also how to achieve it in the context of funding, capacity, innovation, partnerships, technology, and beyond. So a conference of hope, because we use the prepping of this conference to understand these challenges of water better and get to the root causes of water insecurity and find solutions that help us change our systems of governance, finance, technology, capacity, innovation, to ensure that what's on the table next week actually sets an agenda for the future and is not a replication of the past.
Thank you very much. Good luck with the conference, and we'll get updates next week. And Paulina will brief now on behalf of the PGA. Thank you.